Okay, y'all, here's the deal. I had fun going to the library some time ago and got like a bunch of books, and they've been sitting in my apartment or in my bag just waiting for me to read them. And I keep telling myself I'm going to. Haven't. I've skimmed through some of these, but I'm going to do a little speed reading because I need to return these. But I'm just going to try and find some good passages in here. Make a little something out of it. So, here we go. Okay, here's something good from They Knew How a Culture of Conspiracy Keeps America Complacent by Sarah Kendzior. Americans are told they deserve the fruits of conspiracy, but they do not. Americans do not deserve climate change, corruption, or coups. Conspirators lure in accomplices with the promise of belonging, designated by prestige and prizes, but in the end, those are just Potemkin lives. It is better to stand outside the conspiracy and judge it than be a participant. It is better to be labeled a conspiracy theorist forever orbiting than inhabit that cold, dead sun. It is better to trust your eyes and ears, not only because official sources are often dishonest, but because they are your eyes and ears, and the conspirators want to devalue that, to flatten individual perception as something formless and malleable. That was the goal of 20th century fascism, and it is easier to attain in the 21st, through algorithms and artificial intelligence and whatever else they offer as a replacement for conscience and consciousness. Where do you hide when the octopus is everywhere? You can find reprieve inside yourself, in your imagination, and your unwillingness to cede your morality. Or you can hide in plain sight, giving the things that mean nothing to the criminal elite but everything to everyone else. Generosity, compassion, unconditional love. There is nothing futile about that kind of life. So this book's about... Here, what does it say? She put forth a timely and unflinching argument. Uncritical faith in broken institutions is as dangerous as false narratives peddled by propagandists. Conspiracy theories are on the rise because officials refuse to enforce accountability for real conspiracies. So she goes into some like corporate conspiracies and stuff. Good stuff, good book. I read it. There we go. Oh, another one. Okay, here is from Natural Causes, An Epidemic of Wellness, The Certainty of Dying, and Killing Ourselves to Live Longer. And this is by the late, great Barbara Eckenreich. Here we go. The Invention of the Self. In today's capitalist culture, the self has been further objectified into a kind of commodity demanding continual effort to maintain a brand. Celebrities clearly have well-defined brands composed of their talents, if any, their personalities, and their physical images, all of which can be monetized and sold. Even lowly aspirants towards wealth and fame are encouraged to develop a brand and project it confidently into the world. And never mind if it is indistinguishable from that of millions of other people. Cheerful, upbeat, and positive thinking have been a favorite since the 1950s. Both for office workers and CEOs. If some darker self, containing fears, resentments, and doubts, remains under your carefully constructed exterior, it is up to you to keep it under wraps. Internal affirmations, I am confident, I am lovable, and I will be successful, are thought to do the trick. What could go wrong? Of course, with the introduction of self-knowledge and self-love, one enters an endless hall of mirrors. How can the self be known to the self, and who is doing the knowing? If we love ourselves, who is doing the loving? It is the inescapable paradox of self-reflection. How can the self be both the knower and the content of what is known? Both the subject and the object, the lover and what is loved. Other people can be annoying, as Sartre famously suggested, but true hell is perpetual imprisonment in the self. Many historians have argued that the rise of self-awareness starting in roughly the 17th century was associated with the outbreak of an epidemic of melancholy in Europe around the same time. And subjective accounts of that disorder correspond very closely with what we now call depression. Chronic anxiety, taking the form of neurasthenia in the 19th century, seems to be another disease of modernism. The self that we love and nurture turns out to be a fragile, untrustworthy thing. Well done, Barbara. Alright, this is a good one. This is from Young Queer America by Maxwell Poth. Real Stories and Faces of LGBTQ plus Youth. And this is Hammy, 18-year-old, they them pronouns from Alabama, outside of tradition. Hello all, my name is Hammy and I am non-binary and bisexual. I am the old age of 18 and currently reside in Mobile, Alabama for college. I basically grew up here and fell in love with the timeless look that remains. I know, the word Alabama doesn't seem ideal for any queer person, and I understand why. Alabama is constantly stuck in this loop of keeping things traditional and lags behind on the topic of equality. I never truly realized this until I went up north and saw such items such as pride flags publicly displayed. When I came back, I noticed the same thing in Alabama, but with Confederate flags. It seemed like the town hated me, so I hated it back. Growing up, I was never exposed to anything outside of tradition, especially in school. I went to private schools my entire life. They were religious and never went outside of tradition. Furthermore, they claimed that everything outside was sinful. As a child, I absorbed what they said because they were adults. They knew everything, right? It wasn't until around middle school that I knew that everything labeled as sinful, awful, and strange by my peers was who I am as a person. So, because of this, I hid a large part of myself from them and from myself. I never knew how harmful it was until the mental toll drained me and disconnected me from reality. Eventually, I accepted myself before anyone else did. It was strange because I felt comfortable wearing feminine things. Before, I couldn't see myself painting my nails and enjoying it, or even wearing a dress. Slowly, I took my time with testing things and seeing what I personally enjoyed and what I simply did not. So, little by little, stepping outside my comfort zone helped me an immense amount. When I came out to my family, it was truly a breath of relief. They loved and accepted me as I was. My parents warned me that others will always judge, but if you love yourself, it will always overpower hate. With this, I blossomed into who I always was. I didn't care what was sinful or outside of tradition. It felt right to me, and that's all that mattered. With my newfound love and acceptance, I started advocating for LGBTQ rights on TikTok. Quickly, I grew an audience and noticed how much it was helping others with their situations. Positive comments about my activism quickly spread and companies started reaching out, including the It Gets Better project. I started helping others on a much larger scale. Through It Gets Better, I connected with people who crave to do the same. They are my friends for life. For my future, I want to continue working with the people I met along the way. My dream is to inspire people around me to advocate for LGBTQ plus rights, to make a movement that stretches globally. However, before I begin that journey, I will not forget where I began. Alabama still lags behind on LGBTQ plus rights, and with a growing population of queer people, it would be selfish of me to leave them feeling, as I felt, hopeless. So in response, I will continue to make the South an accepting and comfortable place for those outside of tradition. Though the town didn't love me, I want it to love people like me before I go. To sum it up, if people dislike you for you, take their hatred and use it as power. Do not dwell with those bad thoughts. You are, well, you. And if people genuinely find an issue in that, that is their problem, not yours. Advocate not only for yourself, but for the community that you are in, and through this you will build incredibly strong bonds. So, what I'm trying to say is be unapologetically you, and love yourself and others as much as you can. Well done, Hammy. That was great. Oh yeah, this one's fun. Okay, this one's great. This book, this one I actually did read all of it. It's the Oregon Coast Photo Road Trip by Rick and Susan Salmon. And so, how to eat, stay, play, and shoot like a pro. So it's obvious that Rick is the guy with the camera. And there's this really sweet thing where he says, I love digital SLR and mirrorless photography and processing my pictures in Lightroom and Photoshop. But I also love the images that Susan produces with her iPhone. You'll see her work in the next section. For now, here's a shot of Susan teaching the iPhone photography to some of our Oregon Coast photo workshop students. It's kind of funny that all the cameras on the tripod are abandoned. And there's a photo of that going on. Oh, but then there's a photo of a horse on the beach and there's all these clouds. Here's one of Susan's iPhone-enhanced images. She used the Distressed FX app to add the clouds to the clear sky. Very cool. Yeah, see that. Good job, Susan. And then just her, she got her own little chapter here too. It's great. Susan's photo tips for smartphone cameras. Do you like to travel light with photo gear? Well, here's some good news. Your smartphone is a great camera for an Oregon Coast sojourn. Locations along the coast at beaches, harbors, and scenic parkways present perfect photo opportunities for these small yet powerful cameras. As we have mentioned throughout the book, the parks and rec areas on the Oregon coast are sometimes gray due to rain and fog. To add pizzazz and variety to doll images, I encourage you to experiment with photo apps, which are available for both iPhone and Android phones. I find that adding effects with the photo apps is a joyful and creative process, and it gets my images more attention on social media. The same might be true for you. Yes, some of my iPhone photos have a distinctive post-process look, but that is my intention. All good. So Susan, you rock. Thanks for the tips. Okay. Ugh. Okay, this is good. This is another graphic novel. Men I Trust by Tommy Parrish. It's normal for people to talk to each other about their lives, right? I don't really know much about what's normal. And there's a photo, drawing. There we go. Okay. Early memoirs. I think I already read something from there before. Okay, over you. William T. Volman, No Immediate Danger, Volume 1 of Carbon Ideologies. This one I really wish I did read all of it, but that's okay. Let's just pick something random. I'm tired. Okay, that paragraph sucked. This book is like so big and dense. Oh well. I'm gonna do this. Oh, here's one by The Hidden Culture and Science of Bisexuality by Julia Shaw. Okay, here's from the chapter Invisibility. Even more elusive than the female bisexual character is the male bisexual, and virtually non-existent is the bisexual non-binary person. When we do see bi men on stage, they are often immediately labeled gay, like in the Oscar-winning 2005 movie Brokeback Mountain. According to the professor of sociology Harry Broad, Brokeback Mountain is routinely discussed about being about gay cowboys, but its characters are so clearly shown to be bisexual. The misframing of the film results from our culture's ongoing tendency to polarize, dichotomize, and oversimplify issues of sexuality and sexual orientation. This tendency should be critiqued and resisted. They're bi shepherds, not gay cowboys. Wow. After the Motion Picture Production Code, which banned any depiction of same-sex relationships or attractions from the 1930s until the early 1960s was lifted, Wayne Bryant, who has written extensively about bi-representation in film, argues that it was not all good news. In the early 1960s, with the end of the code, the floodgates opened, not simply for films with bisexual characters, but for the stereotyping that accompanied them. The bi-male stereotypes that emerged came in a variety of forms. A common theme was that bisexual husbands always hide their sexuality from their wives. They beat their wives, they were victims of extortion, or they couldn't deal with their same-sex attractions. Then there was the idea that bi men had sex with anything that moves. In the 1980s, when media often depicted bisexual men as vectors of HIV transmission from the gay to the heterosexual community, the image of bisexual men as the sadomasochistic, drug-linked, sexualized killer came onto the screen. Again, themes of duplicity were big, with bi men often portrayed as having a secret life, as lying to themselves, their partners, and society about who they really are. Okay, that's good. Julia Shaw, good book. Ending with my favorite. Wait, do I have a library book in here? Oh, yeah. I have James Baldwin, Notes of a Native Son. I've had in my bag forever. And I actually have read some of this. But read it yourself. Okay, actually this is good. This is from Equal in Paris, and I guess James Baldwin was arrested in Paris. I didn't read why. Let's see. The next day, the 26th, I spent learning a peculiar kind of game. Played with matchsticks with my cellmates. For, since I no longer felt like I would stay in the cell forever, I was beginning to make peace with it for a time. On the 27th, I went again to trial, and as had been predicted, the case against us was dismissed. The story of the drap de lit, finally told, caused great merriment in the courtroom, whereupon my friend decided that the French were great. I was chilled by their merriment, even though it was meant to warm me. It could only remind me of the laughter I had often heard at home, laughter which I had sometimes deliberately elicited. The laughter is the laughter of those who consider themselves to be at a safe remove from all the wretched, for whom the pain of living is not real. I had heard it so often in my native land that I had resolved to find a place where I would never hear it any more. In some deep, black, stony, and liberating way, my life, in my own eyes, began during that first year in Paris, when it was borne on me that this laughter is universal and can never be stilled. Boom. Okay, and this is great. This is Good Time Girls of the Pacific Northwest, and by Jan McKell Collins. Prostitution in Portland. Portland's first documented madame of note was Nancy Boggs, who opened her bordello in 1870. Born in Pennsylvania, Nancy was still married but raising her daughter alone when she first appeared in Portland during the 1860 census. Over time, Nancy tried a variety of careers, including that of a seamstress and dressmaker, before turning to prostitution. During the 20 years she was in Portland, 10 of them were spent on the Willamette River, for Nancy's brothel was actually housed on a bright crimson barge measuring roughly 80 feet long by 40 feet wide. The barge was settled in the middle of the river between Portland and East Portland. There were 2 floors, with a saloon and dance hall on the first, and rooms for 10 to 15 girls on the second. Smaller boats transported customers from shore. Nancy's female employees knew how to handle the sin ship. During unusually high water on the river in 1876, Nancy and her girls are said to have manned the unwieldy ship in a masterful fashion. Nancy's barge could accommodate men on the shores or fishermen in the water from Linton to Portland and all the way south to Oregon City. Being on the river, the lady answered to no authority. 3 river towns, Portland, East Portland, and Albina, each sported its own government, police department, and laws concerning prostitution and liquor. With no bridges to connect the 3, Nancy could operate in relative peace without having to obey the ordinances from any of them. In times of trouble, she could simply head her barge into the middle of the river. Thus, during her time on the water, Nancy paid neither liquor fees nor fines. Prostitution-friendly Portland was tolerant enough of a bordello boat in their midst, but they were not so happy that the city's most unique madame declined to pay for her privilege. Authorities on both sides of the river made several attempts to access the barge and force Nancy to pay her fees and fines. When this happened, Nancy simply hoisted anchor and floated her boat to the opposite side. The police forces of Portland and East Portland, which were rivals, eventually devised a mutually satisfying plan and came at Nancy's barge from both sides. But the wise madame knew they were coming. By attaching a hose to the boiler, the creative courtesan was able to spray scalding steam towards both police boats. Great billows of steam filled the air as officials on both sides of the river bellowed and scattered about as they retreated. Nancy, Boggs, you are so cool. The public display of defeat did not sit well with the authorities, and a successful backup plan was immediately hatched to sneak up to the barge in the dead of night and cut its anchor line. Soon, Nancy's floating house of pleasure was drifting down the river. Only one customer was aboard at the time, but he was too drunk to be of help. Accordingly, Nancy lowered into her own riverboat and headed for shore. She disembarked at Albina, where she found a friendly sternwheeler skipper to tow her barge back upstream and secure the anchor once more. When authorities awoke the next morning, the barge was not drifting precariously downstream, but instead floating leisurely in the middle of the river. Nancy, you rock. Good job. Okay, folks, sometimes you gotta get some books and let them marinate and not be read for a long time, and then you read a little bit and you feel smarter. My brain is pulsing with power. Oh.